Testing, testing. One, two, three.
Loud and clear. Where's the intro music, Cow?
It's not playing for you guys? I heard it on my end.
Not for me.
Not for me either.
I was jamming out to it. I was like, you were speaking over it too. I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. What's up, guys?
Nothing much. Chilling. Exciting times.
Chad, how you feeling? We finally got lending shipped. Last time we talked here, it was when we were having to delay it a couple of days, and now we're here. Lending's been live for probably like I don't know, 4 days, 5 days now. I think we started on Sunday night or Monday. How you feeling about the whole thing?
I mean, it feels like we finally get a launch after so much time on working on that particular feature. And it's probably the biggest feature we've launched since we launched THORChain. So it's obviously a significant milestone for the project.
Yeah, I kind of see this one as like your baby. Like, you've been uh, so excited about this. I mean, we all have, the whole community, of course. But yeah, it's so cool to finally see this like wild idea that's gone through so many iterations over so much time, and actually seeing those alerts like, oh, BTC loan open. It's pretty dang cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's very exciting to see it. It's good to see it to take off, and um, I'll be very interested to see what happens over the coming like few months to see how it performs, right? Because as I've said many times in the past, like this is a novel idea. This is an experimental concept. There are a lot of things that need to be proven about the idea, and so we're finally in the place where we get to kind of watch things and see if elements to the design make sense or they don't. We'll have to do the actual real market. So I'm really excited to see this the next few months.
Yeah, what do you think right now about expanding into other assets? Is it proven out enough on Bitcoin and ETH to start expanding to other assets, or do you think we should let it bake a little bit more before opening up to everything like Litecoin loans and Bitcoin Cash and everything else?
No, I would say it needs more time than what we have so far. I would say that um, we at least need to wait. I would say in order to add more assets, in my opinion, if you want my 2 cents, I would want to see at least 3 months, maybe three or 4 months, maybe even longer, to see how the behavior works with these two assets. And I think that will like showing that behavior of how people react in certain case scenarios of like market conditions and so forth and so on, of when people open or when they close and this kind of stuff will help us inform us to whether or not a lower market cap or a more illiquid asset is um, safe, safer, or less safe for the protocol, right? I still want to see the behavior of these two assets for the next few months to see how that like kind of pans out before we step uh, into other assets.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I just got up Simon here from Chain Flip. I know we're definitely close. You guys are one of the closest protocols to THORChain. So what's up, man? Like thanks for coming up in these spaces. Glad to have you as part of the broader community.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the invite. Very happy to be here. Congratulations on the launch of lending, guys. Really cool.
Thanks, man.
And anyone from the community can also just request and come up if you have just questions about lending or just like want to share your 2 cents about any feedback that people have about the launch or the feature. I'm pretty like one thing that I've been taking note of like since it's gone live is just how orderly it's been. Like and I think it's good that it isn't just like a mad rush to like everybody take out the first loans and everyone's just like fighting for like to be first in. I kind of like the slow, cautious thing, and that's pretty much what we've seen with every major feature launch. Like Savers, it's just slow, steady ramp up for, X number of months. And I don't know what your guys' thoughts are, but I'm assuming that we're going to see something similar for lending, where it's like, just a slow, steady, there's no real rush in the gate, which I think is like really the proper way to, launch something that's like this, not to have everyone be like, all right, everybody is just taking out loans like right now, and then the caps are filled, and then everyone's sitting on their hands. So it's more of a slow, orderly like process to get it ramped up.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad to see that that's the way it's going. I feel like it's just a lot easier to, not get out of control and just see how everything's happening. Like on the THORswap side, before the launch, the devs were like, pulling all nighters and everything, and there was kind of this thing in the back of everyone's mind of like, is anyone even going to get to use the UI, or are bots just going to like eat up the entire thing on like second zero? But yeah, personally, I'm kind of glad to see that it's just rolling out in like a more controlled way, let people get a feel for it. I think people want to like, see it work in all directions a bit. Like I think part of it is probably the 30-day minimum to pay back. I feel like that's probably what some people are waiting for, just to kind of see the system work in both directions. I am curious, Chad, your thoughts on that. Like, do you think the 30 days is going to stick, or like, I mean, I love it in like in concept, like not letting it immediately, but I just wonder if like you think 30 days is the final, or do you see that kind of coming down?
That's a good question. And I'm open to either direction, really. Just depending upon how we see behavior and these kind of things. I think in part, the point of this 30-day thing is to make sure, or just to advocate for a longer term loan, like that we want people to utilize this loan on a, not like on a short term degen mentality, but to have a kind of long term view. And I think that 30-day thing is just kind of helping us to kind of garner the correct kind of audience we want to see utilizing this type of loan. So I think for me, like 30 days seems like a reasonable first go at it. And if the community feels differently, after we've seen some like data come back and this kind of stuff, I'm opening to either extending it further or contracting it depending upon, the information we have. Like we always have to be aware that like that with new information and new data, we should be able to, strong opinions loosely held, right? And if we feel with new information and data about things, we should be able to kind of modify our viewpoints on things.
What's your sense so far about how it's going?
I think so. My general viewpoint is that thus far it's actually been pretty clean. We've had a few bugs initially, nothing like too significant, very small bugs. Most of it's around like the quotes endpoint, for example. But like that, it's kind of expected to have a really large feature, and obviously there's gonna be some things to iron out that you don't find during the testing process. So over the next like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we're going to be, just bug fixing some things. The UIs are also getting their UIs kind of like settled and more, more baked. And then the other kind of thing that we're hoping to push out relatively soon is allowing stream swaps to enter and exit loans. And that's actually a little bit of a complicated conundrum to do that, because you actually want high fees in certain scenarios. And when you have a highly volatile uh, market, you want high fees. It's a way of the network protecting itself from some kind of scenarios with lending. And so you don't always want people to pay 5 basis points on their slip fees in all cases and scenarios. And so there was some math to figure out, which we did figure it out. It wasn't that actually hard in the end. I thought it was going to be more difficult. But there was some math to be figured out of like, how do we scale down streaming swaps when the market's more volatile? And then there's also the complexities around like, well, we don't want to get situations where streaming swaps create complexities around like loans themselves, because you can have these scenarios where a streaming swap is like partially fulfilled. And so if you're like, you can't really partially open a loan or partially close a loan. And that if you did a lot like that, you would make the code like a lot more complex. And then you would also kind of create an opportunity for more bugs, issues, maybe even exploits. And so I'm kind of hesitant around doing that. And so I'll make sure that we can make some changes to streaming swaps to make sure with a very high degree of certainty that if you were to open a loan or close a loan, that you would not get to this kind of half open, half closed. So there's like a bunch of problems to be solved, and I think we've pretty much solved most of them, if not all of them. And then that will allow people to enter with much larger size than what we've seen thus far. I think in general, I think the biggest loan we've seen thus far, maybe Cow or Chad THOReau can correct me, but it's probably around like what 25 or 30K. You know, it's probably the biggest loan, and I think we've heard from multiple people in the community saying that they know somebody or they are somebody who wants to take a much larger loan, but they're waiting for the slippage was just too much, you know, to kind of support them, which makes complete sense to be objective. So I think once we get the streaming swaps working on lending, we might see an uptick in terms of like larger size trades.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. That was the largest I saw too. I think 2 BTC collateral and approximately 1 BTC as the loan amount. Yeah, so I think streaming swaps will definitely open that up to larger loans potentially. And same thing for savers. Like, is it equally? Is it? I would actually guess it's simpler to do for savers than for lending. Is that true? Like, is that because that's going to be? I mean, I'm really excited for that. Like, because especially with just how the network has been recently, like suddenly there's all this extra cap space, and we got stable savers. I'm sure we'll get into like rolling out, and like so savers is looking pretty sweet again. And then you put streaming savers on top of that, and like that's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, so streaming for savers is a little bit simpler because in a loan there's actually 4 trades happening, right? 2 swaps on the collateral coming inbound, and then 2 swaps on the debt going outbound. And you want to make sure you do all that in an atomic fashion, right? Or in a way that you're not going to fail the transaction on the way out on the debt, for example. And that's one of the challenges of streaming swaps is because it's up across multiple blocks. You really can't do an atomic streaming swap. It doesn't make any sense. So that's a lot more complex and difficult than savers. But the problem with savers, the challenge with savers, is that you are streaming into a synthetic position, and there are synth caps and there are TVL caps, right? And so what happens when you start the streaming process to become a saver, and then halfway through that process, we hit the synth cap or we hit the TVL cap, and we have to like, you know, reject your thing or whatever. And that's a discussion that myself and Dennis are having about what's the best way to handle that. My initial feeling is that like as long as we have enough space at the beginning of the streaming swap, it probably doesn't actually matter. Like these caps are not like hard caps, like you can't go over it by $1 or else the whole thing will crash. Like they're quite soft in their nature. So and these streaming swaps happen probably at every block over, you know, several thousands of dollars. And so like you could probably get most streaming swaps will happen within a minute, right? For entering or exiting a saver's position. So it's like very small like period of time. So it's probably not that big of a deal. But I'm still having conversations and debates with Dennis about this topic. But yes, savers is a simpler thing to support than loans, but they still have their kind of sharp edges.
Hello, Chris.
Hey,
Chris?
go ahead.
I've got some lending stats here. So talking about the biggest loan, 2.6 BTC collateral for getting out about 1.19. So that was the biggest, about 30,000. Just looking at a Flipside dashboard there as well. I know that there's about $1 million worth of collateral and about $478,000 has been borrowed. 204 loans opened with 135 distinct borrowers over 4 days. So it's like what you said, it's slowly getting there, which is pretty good. Hasn't been a huge uptake, but I think that's good as well. And you can just see that slowly building on time. And about 348,000 runes being burnt. Talking about the BTC and Ethereum assets and enabling the other ones. I think it's also worth noting that both the BTC and Ethereum dominance is 67% of the entire crypto market cap. So every other asset, even the old ones we have on THORChain, would be relatively small. So I think it's good to have those assets to see what the market does with Bitcoin and Ethereum, because they're the two biggest assets in crypto by far. So I think that's really good. And that 67% just kind of shows you how big just those two assets are alone. I did have a question, Chad. So I know that lending's been tweaked, particularly around the VPool debts, the anchor blocks. So how many blocks back you're looking to tweak the VPool debts and the sensitivity. So we're targeting, so it's like 95%. Did you just want to talk through that, some of the tweaking and because of the effect streaming swaps had on the VPools?
Yeah. So how do we put this? So the depth of virtual pools of the derived assets is dynamic, right? It's calculated based upon the trade volume through the layer one counterpart of that derived asset. And that's there primarily for two reasons. One is to make sure that nobody can price manipulate the network and fuck over the lending system, similar to what we saw with mega markets. And the second thing is it creates friction when there's a flash of capital passing through the network, going from lending to exiting lending positions. And it's kind of similar to what you might see in Bitcoin's case of when a lot of people want to make Bitcoin transactions all more or less the same time, the network solves this problem via just increasing fees, and that just basically figures out who's going to exit and that kind of stuff. Anybody can exit any time. It's just a question of whether or not you want to pay the fees at the time. And so, because there's always trade volume through the layer one pool, more or less, there's never going to be 100%. The virtual pool is never going to be 100% the size of the layer one. It's just never going to be, because there's always some amount of trade volume. And the question is, what do we want the resting point to be, so to speak? When everything's just kind of normal, there's something crazy happening. Bitcoin's not mooning, that's causing a lot of volatility, or a huge amount of trade volumes happening because of some launch of a new feature or something of this nature. What do we want the resting point to be? And I think the agreement that I have with some of the devs here is that 95% is probably a good, target to have, especially when it comes to virtual streaming, which I'll get back to that a little bit later on. But so 95% is kind of a good target to do so. And what that means is we have to make sure that the virtual pool is tracking relative to the trade volume and pool depth of how close it is tracking towards that 95%. And the problem is that we're having, and we kind of knew this before, but we felt this was probably a good kind of V1 step of handling it. But was that we set a hard static number, which currently is set at 60%. And that number is a static number, and it's applied to all pools. But not all pools are the same in terms of trade, in terms of their capital efficiency, the amount of volume passing through it versus the depth of that pool, right? And things change. Markets change themselves. Maybe there's less trading now because it's bear market, and there's more trading later because it's bull market. And maybe we just launched a new feature called streaming swaps, which increase the trade volume by 5 or 10x or whatever the number was, and that changes the capital efficiency of these pools, which causes these pools to become more shallow. The derived pools become more shallow. And so that's all well and good and everything, but what we need is a more dynamic way, right, of managing the virtual pools. And we want to do it in a way that it doesn't require constant governance to tweak and up and tweak down and based upon conditions and that kind of thing. It's just too much of a pain in the ass. And so we proposed a design change to how that pool is calculated, to be a mathematical computation rather than just a set static number of 60% or 70%. So the first thing to do, just to kind of improve the situation, is we're going to increase that number from 60% probably to 70%, maybe even go higher depending upon how the network reacts to that 70% number, just back up towards 90% so that we pay less fees and resting point for opening and closing loans. And then after that, there's this proposal to make a change that the network will will compute how much sensitivity an individual pool needs based upon the last 2 weeks of volatility and trade volume and all these things. And you can kind of think of it similar to Bitcoin and the way that it does its like mining difficulty, and that every 2 weeks the Bitcoin blockchain analyzes how much hash rate it has, hash power it has to compute its blocks, and it adjusts the difficulty of mining based upon that information. It's conceptually a little bit similar to that, and that look at the last 2 weeks and adjusting every 2 weeks so that if there was some sort of crazy event that happened today, it wouldn't actually change the sensitivity of the pools at all. It would take a sustained amount of time, like a week plus, of unusual trade volume or a change in trade volume versus the depth of the pool to be either increased or decreased in another direction, and the network would just naturally adjust itself as it needs to, week to week, in a matter of speaking. So I think that's the long-term kind of fix to this particular thing, and that's something I'm looking to get done, in the next couple of releases. No like rush on this. It's not like a big of a deal, but it is a way to get the network to be kind of self-maintaining over the long term. Does that make sense?
So, yeah. So that means that lenders will essentially be getting a better deal because the V pool, which was one of the swaps will go through, will be more matched to the actual L1 pool, such as the Bitcoin pool. You go through the derived asset Bitcoin pool. They'll get a better deal because it's more in line under normal conditions, essentially, and then the network's going to dynamically adjust depending on, you could say, market situations.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll definitely give traders a better deal, specifically during normal conditions, like normal market conditions. And I think what's kind of funny is that that 60% number we're using now was calculated before streaming swaps had been launched, and so it was the correct number for months. And we actually tried this specific number, 60%, like I think it was like 7 months ago. We initially tried it on mainnet just to see if that was the correct number to use, and it was. It was actually around like 95% for like a long period of time. But then we, added streaming swaps, which changed the amount of trade volume through pools, obviously, and that all of a sudden the Bitcoin pool and the ETH derived assets pool became like, instead of being 95%, it was sitting at like 75%, right? Which is like obviously a significant, pull down. So once we increase this number from 60% to 70%, maybe even 80, I think we'll be in a better condition immediately. And then what we'll probably then do is make that kind of dynamic change, which in the next few weeks, and that will just be the kind of way to solve the problem in a more permanent perspective.
So the V pools, one of the benefits, at least before streaming swaps, was to detect pool manipulation, and then you could say incentivize an orderly withdrawal. So if there's huge amounts of trading, if there's a big spike of trades in the L1, it would reduce the pool, the V pool depth. So then it wouldn't be an optimal time to get out. And obviously streaming swaps does that smoothing effect. So you could stream out, everybody could potentially stream out, and you wouldn't have this massive spike because people aren't necessarily doing instant swaps to exit. So how does it still provide that pool manipulation and incentivize an orderly exit in those very high volatility times outside of normal trading?
Yeah, so there's two components to this. So there was some kind of interesting math that took us a while to figure it out. But when you're swapping between two pools of different depths to them, right, which means you're going to pay a different fee in pool A versus pool B, and if you specifically want to get 5 basis points in the swap fees total between those two pools, calculating the exact swap size you need between these two different pools of different sizes was a little bit of a tricky problem to solve, and thankfully we actually found the math to do so. And so as the layer one pool will stay more or less constant, right, and the virtual pool become more and more shallow the more exodus there is, or the more volume passing through the layer one pool. So as that number comes down, the virtual becomes more shallow. Well, the size of each individual subswap gets smaller in size to maintain that 5% basis points, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
all of a sudden, it's, in a normal scenario, let's just imagine the case that, like, in a normal case, you needed 10 trades, 10 sub swaps to get that your 5 basis points, right? In a normal case and scenario. But then imagine if the virtual pool is now halved or even 90% lower, in depth. And all of a sudden, instead of 10 trades, you actually need, I'm making up numbers here, so don't quote me here, but like 100 trades, right? So it actually dynamically means that you need a lot more trades to maintain that 5 basis points. That's the first component. So you need a lot more trades to maintain that low 5 basis points, fee that you would be paying. And the second component is that lending itself will put a cap on the streaming swap quantity based upon how much the virtual pool has reduced in size, right? And it follows the same exponential curvature, if you want to call it that streaming swap saves on transactions. So when you do a trade on THORChain, when you break your trade into two different swaps, you basically are getting about 50% reduction in swap fees. If you do 3 swaps, you're now getting approximately about 75%. So adding another trade is decreasing by 25% instead of 50%. And another trade of that is like 12.5, and it basically goes down, 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 down. So it's exponentially decreasing as you increase the number of swaps. And so we're following that same curvature, but just going in the reverse direction, right? So if the pool was hypothetically 100%, the virtual pool is 100%, then you basically, there's no cap to the streaming swaps. So it could be the high numbers you want, basically infinity, right? Whatever the hell the number is, right? If you go to it's 99.99% the size, well, now you move from infinity to about 10,000 swaps, right? And if you go to 99.9%, it's now 100 swaps. And if you go to 99%, it's now, I think, 10 swaps, something like this. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. But it decreases very fast, right? And to the point where when you get to 95%, which is kind of the resting point, the maximum number of swaps allowed would be about 20, right? And so you have the maximum swaps allowed is decreasing, and then also the number of swaps needed to get 5 basis point is increasing. And these two things are basically sandwiching, right? And they're both increasing the fees in their own right, in a matter of speaking, if that makes sense to you. So eventually you get to the point where if you get to the pool becomes 49.999% the depth of the layer 1 pool, now the streaming swap is reduced to 1%. One swap, which effectively is no streaming swaps whatsoever. And so streaming swaps effectively disables or starts to tune itself down as more volatility exists in the layer 1 pool, and that increases fees in line with the reduction of the pool size, if that makes sense. This is all quite complicated. I'm hoping I'm explaining it in a way that's not too boring or convoluted.
No, I get it. So essentially, the more L1 trading, the more see if it's the Bitcoin pool, the more trading that happens there, the more the V pool reduces, which means that the less benefit you can get from streaming swaps. So there's like a relationship between the trading and the streaming swap benefit, essentially. And the higher the trade volume is on the pool, the less you can use streaming swaps because of the V pool depth difference.
Right. Even at 95%, the depth, you're only ever going to get 20 swaps possible. So if you're like a big giant whale, that's probably not going to be. It may not be enough for you or whatever. But then also at the same time, the each individual sub swap is going to be even more larger relative to what 5 basis points would give you.
Yeah, it's just reducing the max streaming swap quantity. And for 20, that's still 95%, but maybe you're not getting 99%. So I'm pretty aware when it starts to go under 10 swaps, that's when it's going to really start affecting that efficiency.
Yeah,
I think 10 being 90%.
Right. I think 10 is 90% or something like this. And so once you get below 90%, now you're at nine swaps or 8 swaps, and it just quickly goes down from there.
That makes sense. So essentially,
Yeah,
you allow streaming swaps at when there's low volatility, and when there's high volatility, it just quickly goes down in the number of streaming swaps you can do. So you when there's low volatility, you can take out really big loans or repay really big loans. But when there is volatility, then you should probably wait to do that until there's low volatility again at some point in the future.
Right. Yeah, at that point, it's up to the individual to say, like, do I want to pay the additional fees now and close my loan now, or do I want to wait until tomorrow and pay less in fees and keep more of my money, right? And that's just a judgment call that everybody's going to make independently of themselves of what they want to do.
and the quote endpoint or interfaces will tell you, right? That's a part of what gets returned when you ask it to say, well, if I put a loan in, this is how much I'm going to get out of debt. So you'll understand whether that's still favorable for you or not from an end user point of view.
Exactly. The UI should inform users of what is the expected payment for this. And by the way, I left this out, and I should have said this earlier, but I left this out by accident. Is that when you open or close a loan right now, you can state what you want your minimum out to get. So if I'm putting in 1 Bitcoin, I can state, like, what, I don't want to get anything less than 12,000 USDC. I don't know. I'm making up the random numbers right now, right? And so the network will abide by that. So if the CR changes quickly underneath your feet in a manner of speaking, or the virtual pool becomes a lot more shallow because of some event that just happened, like during your process, it will that loan is not opened under those conditions that you set. But because streaming swaps are different, and streaming swaps are not atomic, and they happen across several blocks, we can't just like partially open a loan or partially close it, at least not without introducing significant complexity and confusion, both for the user and for the protocol itself. And so if you're going to use streaming swaps on lending, you have to opt out of the minimum out concept. And so you're going to say, like, just give me what you can give me, right? In order to make sure that the streaming swap is successful and it doesn't get into this partial fulfillment, partial not, whatever it is, you have to opt out of having this min out idea. Now, if you want the min out, then you have to pay the higher fees. I think that's just going to be the trade-off that you're going to have to make.
Interesting. So streaming swaps more like DCA. So seeing that like a dollar cost average.
You can look at it that way. I wouldn't, just because the time frame of when this is happening is, probably very short. You know what I mean? Within, for like, at least for 99% of people, it would be within a few minutes, right? So I wouldn't apply the idea of DCA of like, I'm going to DCA over the next 5 minutes. Although technically, I suppose that's technically true. Like, but like nobody thinks about DCAing over a 5-minute time period. That's just a little bit of a silly notion. But so you're just gonna say, like, I'm gonna follow the market for the next few minutes, right? Depending upon the size of your position.
Cool. I think the opposite's the same as well. Like, that'll be the same for when you repay your loan. In the repayment, you can have a look at what collateral you're going to get back if you were to fully repay the loan. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the same on the outbound or closing loan as well.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned earlier, Chad, is interfaces. And so like right now it's just THORswap and Lens doing front end for lending. But we just met today with the Shapeshift team who's working on lending. I'm sure THORwallet's also working on it. I'm sure other interfaces as well are working on different lending interfaces. Just tweeted out earlier that Pulsar is doing lending dashboards, and so like we're seeing a lot of like new front ends, like kind of crop up out of nowhere, just like that. Just kind of the immediate ecosystem right now, and like people who are already doing things with like swaps and savers, and now they're offering loans, but nothing yet outside of the immediate space, but I guess that's really not to be expected until it's like a lot more battle tested, and we really have everything nailed down on the UX end. But yeah, I think we'll see some more interfaces cropping up soon over the next couple weeks and months for sure.
Yeah, excited to see more UIs get involved in the game here. I'm sure Shapeshift will probably add lending at some point too. They're probably going to be doing that at some point. I'm assuming.
Yeah, we literally just met with them today, just like giving them feedback on their like design for the open and closing and stuff like that. So they're well on the path of getting this shipped out. And they also just put in streaming swaps the other day, and I think we saw our first big streaming swap come through Shapeshift today. Is like a 77 Ether to Bitcoin swap coming through the Shapeshift front end. I saw, so I think that was the first big swap to come through Shapeshift. So huge shout outs to those guys getting their first piece.
I really feel like the industry has not figured out how huge streaming swaps is, like how much it changes things. It's so funny because the change itself wasn't that huge of a change in terms of like the code base. Like it had some size to it, but not that relative to other things. It's really not that huge of a change to the code base, but yet it has a very significant effect on the value proposition or the usability of this particular network. And it's shown, obviously it's blatantly obvious that it's been a highly successful feature thus far for the protocol. And it's going to, I think, usher in a greater shift away from sexes towards dexes, and actually, because like there's no reason why we can't outperform sexes and pretty much almost every attribute, with the exception of a handful of things like fiat and maybe cross-chain asset management is a difficult problem to solve in a decentralized way. But like things like spot trading, perpetuals, like lending, interest accounts, like these kind of things, like there's no reason why we can't do this far better and far cheaper and far more efficiently and far more open and transparent than what is reasonable or possible that for any sex to actually accomplish. So like anybody who's looking at this stuff objectively and who has a good mind behind them can look at the situation and say like this industry, like and I'll include Chainflip in this context of like anything that we are doing as a community, whether it be THORChain or Chainflip or other people in the industry, like we all collectively can effectively sex in so many ways.
Yeah, I want to echo that sentiment as well. I mean, literally on the vision page on our website, our mission is to displace the centralized exchange. And I think Uniswap proved beyond a reasonable doubt what's possible, right? If you can offer a product which actually offers a comparable swapping experience in terms of, pricing and expectations and so forth, people come. And that happened in 2020 in a big way. So, most people probably don't bother to log in to Binance or whatever to swap USDC to ETH, for example, anymore. And I think, the more we can do to, optimize the experience for Web3 users in general with on-chain trading, particularly in the spot market. But as you say, there's plenty of other opportunities as well. I think that's going to be, I don't think people have quite clocked on to how massive that could really be in terms of volume. Like Bitcoin being 48% of this entire market is just a huge underserviced opportunity, I would say, for the industry. And it's something that's been sitting in our backyard now for a decade. And we still like the general user base hasn't clocked on to the idea that this is now possible and efficient and good. So yeah, really excited to be on the same mission as well. And I hope we can make a dent too, because I think, FTX, especially last year, was a big wake up call for a lot of people that just thought, this is fine. The status quo is fine, but it's really not. And, I think we're all taking the right steps to make that change. I just wonder, how long is it going to take for people to clock onto that idea? And I think the answer is going to be, more integrations, have it be more accessible, have it be there in the background, have it be there as an option, and then gradually over time, in the same way that Uniswap was there for a long time before we saw anything like what 2020 became. That I think that's the same sort of trajectory that we're going to face here in the cross-chain space, and that excites me, and I'm assuming it excites you guys too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to add on what you just said, like people are waking up because of FTX, right? Which is obvious and clear. And then you also have like Quadriga and Mount Gox and like okay, there's a whole slew of like there's one
Numbers.
called. And what's funny is that they all basically have died and for a lot of like the same reason. You know what I mean? It's like the same mistake almost.
The money wasn't, for whatever reason, the money wasn't there. That's it. Simple as that.
Yeah, for one reason or another, money wasn't there. And what's great about this DeFi space, like even if THORChain were to collapse tomorrow, right, or some whatever, right, hypothetically speaking, like we would learn from it. Like first of all, everybody who's participating in it had clear knowledge of everything that was happening, right? Like in Quadriga and FTX and stuff like this, like nobody knew what the fuck was happening, and if you did know, you'd probably run the fuck away, right? But in something like a chain flip or a THORChain, if things don't go right, you at least knew everything that was happening, and in the end, you made the choice to put your money in chain flip or in THORChain or whatever it might be, and whatever happens, the community learns from it. And maybe we make a mistake that chain flip learns from, and you can change how your thing is like. Or maybe we made a mistake, like for actually perfect example, we made a mistake with security in the earliest days of our beta, right? And we got exploited once a couple times, and we learned from that mistake. And it would be great if somebody like a chain flip, for example, observes the mistake that we had made and say, you know what, they made a mistake. Here's the solution they came up with. We like that solution, or maybe we don't like that solution. Doesn't really matter. And you just adjust yourselves to make it to like correcting yourselves from the things that mistakes we made, right? And so forth and so on. You guys might make a mistake on Chainflip, and we're like, oh, that's a really interesting mistake that Chainflip made. We should probably make a change ourselves to address that particular issue, whatever it is. Not that I'm trying to flood Chainflip or anything like this.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, when the THORChain hacks happened back in the Chaos Net days, like we looked pretty closely at like the types of exploits that actually happened there, and that was really helpful for us actually to sort of go, okay, well, what is the actual like potential surface area for an attack? Like, what should we focus on in our audits? What should we focus on in our internal reviews and so on? So that, yeah, that you're absolutely right. It's been very informative to work it out, and I think also like with these DeFi products, it's not like with FTX where you just have your money sitting there all the time, right? This is like you're only exposed to it. Most users, if you're not LPing or whatever, you do a swap and that's it. Exposure over. It doesn't matter what happens then. It's in your wallet. It's
right.
the underlying assets are there, right? So I think even just that, even if potentially these products are more complex and potentially vulnerable in different ways, if the tail risk is managed or eliminated entirely, then it's still a superior product and it's still superior to what the centralized exchanges can offer in terms of security, because you're just not exposed to it when you're not using it, which is not true 90% of the time, the way that people mainly use exchanges. So yeah, self-custody, yeah. Not your keys, not your coins. We've said that over the last decade.
Exchanges are designed for you to deposit your money and leave it there. That they want you, that they specifically, they don't make it easy for you to deposit and swap and exit like you do on THORChain or Chainflip, because they don't want you to do it. They want you to hold their capital so they can play with it and do things with it that they want to, either for shorts or, options or whatever the fuck they want to do with it, or just resell it for other purposes. Like who knows what the fuck they're doing behind the scenes. We don't have any clarity. Another great thing that
every time I roll lately, I have been re-KYC'd like 3 times in a row. Great.
Fuck. One thing that I hope that we can do, and this is something that Lena and I were just talking about today, and we were talking about you guys over at Chainflip, is that like there's a crazy, interesting ideal that we can achieve as an industry. Me as a THORChain community, and you as a Chainflip and so forth. Is that like we can connect to each other and utilize each other
arbitrarily.
Yeah. The fuck out of this thing. Like I'm totally down to doing a DEX aggregation with Chainflip and Chainflip with us, and then we can pull on your liquidity and use your assets that you connect with, and you guys can do the same thing on our side. And then in the end, what you're left with is that users will just use whatever is the most efficient, pathway to give them good price execution or whatever the hell the thing might be. And whereas in the centralized exchange world, like everybody wants to be themselves and like the capitalistic mentality, everybody trying to beat everybody else, just creates, like a competitive market, which in itself is a good thing at a high level. But wouldn't it be amazing if we just had a series of public good networks, whether it be Chainflip and THORChain and Uniswap and and Trader Joe and fucking everything else in the industry, and we all just fucking talk to each other and we just swap amongst each other and make it super clean and super easy for the user to acquire any fucking asset whenever the goddamn they please, without signing up and all this bullshit and deploying assets and getting like, fucking all this shit. Like, how amazing would that be if we just like work together as an industry and we could totally fucking do it, and it'd be fucking awesome.
It's relatively straightforward as well. I mean, like for example, we're not going to be listing Litecoin anytime soon, as one example, right? So there's like plenty of overlap where it makes complete sense, even if you're not aggregating across any given pair. So yeah, totally, absolutely, and like that's why we put so much work into the Chainflip SDK, right? This is the whole thing. Cross-chain messaging as well, composability. That's like one of the key ideas of DeFi that made it interesting in the first place. And so, yeah, like absolutely, aggregation is 100% a huge part of our strategy. And I think a key component in actually taking on Binance or whoever, right? Because, as a user, it's nice to be FTX or whatever and be able to swap to pretty much anything I can think of that might be relevant to me. Rather than just hopping around all these random bridges and random dexes on random chains to get to where I want to go, like, and having to do multiple transfers and all this weird stuff that shouldn't be there and doesn't have to be there. So yeah, absolutely. We're 100% on board with that.
That would be sick. That'd be so awesome. The industry would win in that scenario. Us working together, it's a win for everybody.
I mean, yeah, it's the cross-chain space as a whole. Like even like the cross-chain messaging protocols, right? Like we're not bridging USD. We don't have to though, because Axel has already done it, right? So if that's what you want to do, you should be able to do it, and there's no reason not to. There really isn't.
I've been thinking more about decentralized exchanges and where they're going in the future, especially with some of this news that's come out recently about like Coinbase acquiring some, like a larger stake in USDC. And obviously they've been involved with Circle in the past. And, like it's similar, like echoes of Binance doing similar things with, Paxos and BUSD and like all these major exchanges. And I've just been thinking about how centralized exchanges will probably become more of a stablecoin issuer, and obviously like working in that like bridge between like the TradFi world and then like bringing like real assets onto chain, tokenizing things, and being that bridge from kind of the real world to on chain, and then a lot of major exchange just happening on dexes. Like to me, that really seems to be the way that it's going. Just because like obviously you need some kind of regulated, like you need these regulated entities to actually like issue these stable coins that are going to scale up to billions and billions of dollars. And you're going to need a bunch of them too, not just Circle or Tether or whatever. So yeah, I'm like that's just one of those things that I've just been kind of chewing on recently. Just like where those sexes are going, and I think it's just going to be more stable coin issuance, and then more and more trading is just going to end up happening on chain on all the dexes that we're building here.
I mean, anecdotally, that's what I already do, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of people in that same boat where you're using the exchange pretty much as a method to get in and out of stables, and then from there you're just on chain the whole time. The industry's got to that point where that's largely possible now, and there's more to go, but it's exciting, definitely.
Hey, speaking of stables, there's one thing that's just come out this week, which is probably not widely known yet because there's really not been a lot of effort put into like getting the word out there yet. But stable savers are live on THORChain, so you can. So all of the Tor anchor assets, so all of the stable coins which are used to find the Tor price, which I believe right now is just Ethereum USDC, AVAX USDC, Ethereum Tether, and maybe BUSD on Binance Chain. I'm not sure if there's more than that, although but all of those assets can be added to savers now. So you can actually deposit, single-sided, just any of those stablecoin assets, and then have a savers position in THORChain. So that's like brand new to the protocol this week. And no one's really made any noise about this yet, and we definitely need to ramp it up a bit and add support for all of the other stablecoin pools that we have, like especially the new ones like LUSD and GUSD and USDP, and there's a good number of them that exist that we need to add support for. But that's a brand new thing to look forward to on THORChain.
Yeah, those are huge, and it plays in really well with streaming swaps too, because all the stablecoin swaps have shifted back to the THORChain pools a lot versus like DEX aggregation with streaming swaps. So now suddenly there's all these fees going to the stablecoin pools. So it's really like, I mean, I'm sure that was not an accident that those kind of happened at around the same time, but yeah, so that's a really sweet product that's out there. And I know on like the THORSwap side, like just kind of waiting for like the APRs to display and stuff like that, but there will be kind of like a more of a actual launch, but it is live.
Okay, so let me splash a little bit of cold water on this, right? Because I want to make sure we keep it real in a matter of speaking. So synthetics in general is it's enabled the network to do a couple things like fast arbs and savers and this kind of stuff, but they also pose a liability on the protocol, right? Because we use the POL to kind of balance the sins and all this kind of stuff. And so that liability is relational. At least this is how I look at it, right? And I'm happy to be proven wrong or whatever. Is that that liability has a relationship to the volatility of the asset, right? In this case, stables. The less volatile something is, the more the increase of the liability, the number of those assets in the network, and the depth of the pool, right? And synth utilization, effectively. And so, because when we move from a bull market to a bear market, right, and the rune price goes down, and the other asset, in this case we're talking about stables, is basically stationary. That means that the POL needs to deploy more rune into that pool to support the LPs of that pool, so forth and so on, right? And so, like, if you go hog wild on this stuff, right, you can put the network into a dangerous scenario. Now, in this particular case, the stablecoin pools are quite shallow, right? And so there's not like a huge amount of liability there. But I want the community to be aware of and to be completely clear and upfront from the get-go. I want the community to be aware of that we don't want these pools to become like massive in size, like something the size of the Bitcoin pool or greater. And we probably don't want to see a 50% synth utilization on these stables, because they pose a greater liability to the protocol. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think we should be aware of this when we're entering it, and kind of keep a watchful eye of it over the next few months or a couple of years or whatever, and just kind of tamper things when it makes sense to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thanks for adding that. Are the caps? Can the synth caps be set specifically for the stable pools? Or is it currently just like across the board?
It's currently across the board. There's no specific synth cap for particular stables. I'm open to the idea of adding that, and maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe we say that for the stable coins we don't want to do a 60% utilization like we other assets. Maybe for those we want to do something smaller, right? Maybe it's 30%. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but just that might be a way of going at it. But in general, I want to make sure that we are aware as a community, and we keep a watchful eye on all of these features we're adding, whether it be savers, lending, all these things we're talking about, that we understand where the sharp edges are, and we know how to handle it when we get closer to those things. In general, most of these problems that we're talking about in the protocol, we can see them coming, a mile away, right? Which is why I'm talking about a theoretical issue that we could have at the next bear market, which is what, like 4 years away. You know what I mean? So it's like we have plenty of time to adjust and correct it and right the ship as we see need to. But I just wanted to voice that mentality, just so the community as a whole is aware of that and keeps a watchful eye over the coming years.
Yep. I thought there was a maximum depth that was available, and it's quite a bit lower for the savers pools for stable coins than it is for just the regular assets. I believe it was like 33% rather than 50%, which isn't. I mean, I'm sure we can adjust that as it goes on, but like, yeah, obviously we don't want them to be like giant stablecoin savers pools, but we do want some kind of depth in the stable savers pools. Yo, Logan, and also THOReau. Sorry, I brought you up here way before, but I haven't really given you guys a chance to speak.
Sorry, I think Simon had something to respond on that previous topic before. Yeah.
I didn't have something to respond, just to a question that crossed my mind while we were talking about that. Like, talking about caps and having like these assets and wanting to restrict the pools and stuff. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently with Chainflip is like, what happens when, and you guys have probably done this before, I don't actually know, but what happens when you make the decision that for the benefit of the protocol, because of the economic security limitations and so forth, what happens when you decide that you need to delist an asset, you need to delete a pool or something? Like, how do you guys actually think about that? Have you guys done that before?
Yes,
we did do it once.
We have done it before. We've done it once before. It was an asset called THOReau. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Okay, yeah, that checks out.
Yeah, so it's complicated. So with synthetics and with lending, it makes it even more complicated, right? And so I think what would need to happen, and to be honest, it's hard to plan for this because the scenario and the situation that we're in that is causing us to delist a particular asset could be a huge wide varying of reasons. Maybe the asset just went to zero, like Luna did, UST did. Maybe it's the beacon chain for BNB, and they're just getting rid of it, or whatever. I don't know. Not that they're getting rid of the beacon chain with BNB. I don't want to spread that kind of thing, but I'm saying like you never know the circumstances are, and those circumstances will greatly influence the process of actually delisting a chain or an asset. But in general, at a high level, we would take a vote as a community and say, hey, we want to get rid of this chain because of X, Y, and Z. Assuming the nodes pass it, this should be a signal to the community to start withdrawing your assets, like start, burning your SIM and, closing your loans if you have collateral in that particular asset. Of course, right now it's only Bitcoin ETH, so, and obviously we're never going to remove those chains for obvious reasons, but like, that does create a lot of complexity, but we have to give people time to withdraw. And if they are sleeping and they don't do that, then there's nothing we can really do about that, with the exception of, with synths, we can probably just we can burn their synths for them, maybe through a store migration. With LPs, we can withdraw their liquidity for them through what we call a Ragnarok protocol. But lending is more sticky and more difficult because it requires them to put in capital to get out the capital, and we're probably not gonna pay off people's loans for them. That's probably not likely to occur.
Yeah,
that's a little more kind of a sticky situation. But we'll have to think about that as a community, and But I can't imagine us really removing chains in general, with the exception of the extreme edge case of like a THOReau.
Yeah, it's just like when you've got limits on how much you can support, right? And both between like validator endpoints as one example, but the economic security and the liquidity as well. I guess so. You guys have a withdrawal address pre-programmed for the LPs, right? So you can just basically yeet their funds when at any point in time, and it's all good. Is that kind of the vibe?
You could do that, but I also think we wouldn't need to, because if a asset or a chain becomes not very valuable and we're just taking up security securing it, then most likely the trade volume of that pool would be rather small, which means that the yield would be rather small, which means there's not much reason to be in there as an LP. And then there's been talk in the past, and I'm still open to doing this, but we haven't ironed it out yet, of changing the math of how rewards work to not give luck rewards to unproductive pools. And we've also talked about, increasing the minimum pool depth to be from 10,000 room to something larger like 100,000 room, just to drop, very shallow pools. But those don't really pose a threat to the security of the network. It's just such a small amount of room anyway. It doesn't really make all that much difference. THOReau was different because THOReau got grew to be like over $100 million pools in terms of their depth rather quickly because of the everybody's excited about THOReau at the time. And it did take up a lot of our security cap space, and that's a little bit different. But generally speaking, if something's taking up a lot of our cap space, then it's probably there for good reason, and there's not going to be much of a drive or interest from the community to remove that thing.
Totally. That makes sense. Thanks for that.
No worries. Sorry, Logan, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I wasn't sure if Simon had a comment on the current conversation before we started a new topic or a new question.
It's all good, man. It's all good. Yeah, I'm just taking notes on the call. You guys are talking high level and making it pretty simple for the most part. But my question is more so related to just the overall market for you, Chad. I know obviously you're a pretty technical guy, and I'm curious to know where you think we are in the overall, just market cycle, right? Do you feel like we're in the beginning phases of a bull right now? Do you feel like we're just now starting to exit, or like the last phase of a bear? I've seen a lot of conflicting back and forth. I mean, I look at the price of Rune and I'm like, man, price has gone down by 90+%. Fundamentals have gone up through the roof. So it's a no-brainer buy to me. But someone like you that's really entrenched in the space, and I'm sure you're more in like build mode than looking at charts. But again, getting your opinion on kind of where we're at in the overall market cycle would be interesting to hear.
Yeah. Okay. So here's how I think about it, and let me preface this and say I'm a builder. I'm a entrepreneur, person. I don't really look at TA. I don't give to TAs. Anybody listening to this, TA is fucking pointless and useless. Don't listen to TA at all. It's fucking stupid.
Wait, you're telling me you can't tell the future by drawing lines on a chart?
No, I saw this funny thing the other day. I think a lot of people saw it, where it was BitBoy talking about THORChain. He brought up like the wrong chart for like 10 minutes, something like this. He brings this chart of a coin he knows nothing about, and he looks at the chart for literally 15 seconds, and he says, "Yeah, this thing's gonna go up here, but it might come back here, but it's not gonna go here." I'm like, what the fuck are you talking? You just literally just drawing lines on a fucking chart with a Sharpie and like thinking he actually has some sort of insight about future was one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time.
It's but like 2017 vibes.
It was ridiculous. I don't know. BitBoy's a low IQ person, to be honest with you. But anyways, here's what I think about it. I don't know about TA. I don't know about price movements and all this shit. But what I do know is like more long term like trends. And from my understanding of the market, and this is how I look at it, and I could be completely wrong, so don't take this as investment advice, is that every bull market and every bear market, for the most part, is longer than its previous one. It's an elongating process that's been happening for 12 plus years, right? Or 13. Whatever. How many years we've been running with Bitcoin now? 12, 13, 14 years?
Whatever the hell the number is.
And like, yeah. So it's most likely, in my opinion, that the bear market we're in now will probably be one of the longest markets we've seen. Now, the one caveat to that is that the last bull market we had was not traditional bull market. We didn't see a blow up top. Things just kind of felt like things got cut short than what we would typically see. But my general feeling is that we are not starting the bull market yet. We are still in the bear market. We're probably going to be here for a good amount of time. We've probably hit the bottom, like in a general, we're just be moving sideways for a long period of time. THORChain's Rune's a little bit different just because we launched streaming swaps. We create a lot more value, so obviously the price kind of reflected that. But generally speaking, we've hit as a market more or less the bottom. That doesn't mean it can't go further down. I mean, Michael Burry, who basically called the 2008 collapse in the housing market, he put a $1.6 billion short on the S&P 500 and specifically tech companies. And in some ways, this guy is actually making a short on AI, thinking that it's a bubble and a lot of these companies are not going to get that far that fast. And so maybe he's right. He put on a huge bet. I mean, $1.6 billion is not a small amount of money. And so he's feeling that, probably by the end of the calendar year, that the market in general is just going to have a strong pullback. And if that's the case, it's certainly going to have an effect on crypto as well. So we could see more of a downside if the general macro of of stocks and bonds and these kind of things pull back as well. But if assuming nothing crazy happens in the macro of the political economic world, of a general political collapse or general market collapse, then we'll probably have hit the bottom of the bear market more or less. If things move sideways up and down a little bit. You might argue, some people might argue, that the halvening will be one of the kickoff things that creates the next bull market. That's been somewhat true in the past, but my assumption is that the halvening within Bitcoin is decreasing effectiveness on the general market. Each halvening that it has a much stronger effect, in its first back in 2012, I think it was, or 2013, and it has less of an effect on each individual halvening. So I still think that the bear market's still alive and well. We're going to be sitting in it for a good amount of time, maybe another year or two. But I could totally be wrong. This is not my expertise. I don't really study this stuff. I'm not an expert in this stuff. What I am expert is just building blockchain, building protocols.
Well, eventually, on a long enough time horizon, you guys keep doing what you're doing. The industry is going to continue to grow. It's obviously not going anywhere. There's a lull. Really, it's the liquidity cycle, right? So, from everything that I'm seeing, there's contradicting. Like a lot of people are just expecting the halvening to be this huge event that kicks everything off. I personally think that we could see some bullish momentum towards the end of the year. And then in 2024, that's when the Fed's going to start cutting rates. But, usually if you look at the past charts, it's like once the Fed starts pivoting, there's a pretty significant market crash then. But then you also have to take into account it's an election year, right? So if the Democrats want to stay in power or whatever, I don't care your political party, but they'll want to pump the market. So part of me thinks that 2024 is going to be a real trash year with the Fed pivoting, and then the other part's they kind of need the markets to pump to save face to try to stay in power as far as political parties go. So it'll be a really interesting thing to play out. But I think if you're looking on a 5 to 10 year time frame, eventually that bull market's going to come. And I'm not planning on selling my rune anytime soon, but again, just seeing your guys' perspective, you've been in the crypto space probably a bit longer than I have and seen a few cycles play out. So always looking for insight.
I might just jump in as someone who's been, doing the VC circuit for the last couple of years and running a token sale right now. A couple interesting insights, about a year ago, a lot of the new VC funding in Web3 just dried up. Funds have been really struggling to get new money to deploy into the space. The capital that's there that's currently being deployed is pretty finite, but it's not non-existent, and that's a big, big difference between what we had in 2018, 2019, where there was just nothing. And I can also say on the token sale side of things, from what I can see, there's still definitely a strong retail base out there, Web3 users and so on, who are still definitely interested in investing. So there's on the one hand, the macro environment does look pretty bad. This is the first time in 30 years that anyone in the tech space has had to deal with an environment with non-zero interest rates. So I think that's going to be a persistent challenge to face over the next decade, let alone the next couple of years. But that being said, there's still some strong interest there. And I think, I think what this comes down to is going to be, when does retail interest, people that aren't already involved in the space, come back? And I think that's going to be the thing that kicks off that institutional funding and so on. But that's what I can see, at least.
I will say though that and this applies both to Chainflip and to THORChain, is that markets aside about bull markets and bear markets and whatever else, objectively looking at the industry as a whole and seeing the amount of volume passing through centralized exchanges and how we are perfectly posed as an industry, both Chainflip and THORChain, to just rug a lot of that liquidity and trade volume. And so that makes me bullish on DeFi industry in general, and obviously specifically on Rune. And so whether we're in a bear market and bull markets and all these kind of things, like I kind of don't really care. It's more about like what is the market that we're going to eat up and eat into and just like basically a rug. And there's so much value to be taken from Binance and Coinbase and things of the such, and that Rune's price should perform well in my opinion. And I don't want to. I'm not giving financial advice. I'm not saying Rune's going to pump tomorrow, so no one fucking throw this shit at me because I almost never talk about Rune's price. But logically, that somebody in the DeFi space, whether that be Chainflip or THORChain or both of them or somebody else who hasn't even entered or Maya or whatever else, like there's so much value to be extracted and to be gained into the DeFi space, and somebody's going to do it really well. And I hope that's THORChain. I hope that's Rune. That's obviously my interest and my bet. But it could definitely be multiple players. But there's so much value to be taken up that the value of the assets in this particular this community of cross chain whatever. Like there's so much value to be taken up into it, and so like I focus more on that, the fundamentals of that, rather than macro movements upward or macro movements downward.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, the spot exchange industry in crypto is probably, I don't have numbers to back this up, to be frank, but I think in terms of just businesses in the space, it's got to be like one of the most profitable businesses in the entire industry. It went historically, at least. So yeah, absolutely. The opportunity here is still massive. And, there's still billions and billions of dollars in volume a day through dozens of assets. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Hey, Juggernaut, what's up, man?
Hey, what's up, guys? You hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My intervention is for Logan. Logan, I follow you, respect you, no problem. But when THORChain is talking about supranational financial system, you can't resume all crypto of in 2024 American election. Please, there is a world around USA. Okay, just to say that. Look at what happened with BRICS now. Maybe they will build their one CDBC. I don't know. Please, it's a global movement, not only in USA. Just thank you.
Yeah, but people still look to the U.S. as the market leader, and for like the Nasdaq is premier, right? And I do agree with you that crypto is global, and fuck the United States for the most part, because if for example, if the United States approved the ETF, Bitcoin would probably fly right now. Like, so when you're saying
that's right,
but that is counteracting what you just said. So it's bigger than the United States, but the United States still holds crypto by the balls to an extent, just because the U.S. is still the most powerful country in the world, and people look to the U.S. as the market leader. But I mean, I do agree with you that it shouldn't be that way, and crypto is global. But it is what it is. Like we're in this period of time where they're trying to fight the tide. Eventually, the regulators are going to get swallowed by the ocean. It's just what's going to happen, and they're basically just delaying the inevitable at this point. It's kind of funny to watch, but yeah, I mean, I do get where you're coming from, and I'm not trying to just be USA centric, but I do live in the United States, and I mostly keep up with US based regulators, if you will.
Just one word, with your permission. THORChain is made for decades. THORChain don't care about USA elections. Okay, it's made for decades. Okay, effective. If Republicans wins in 2024. Maybe crypto market will be better. Maybe, don't know. For how much time? An evolution is for decades. It's not for 2 years or 1 year. Or I think we must think the project for for more than one next election in one country. It's my opinion.
Hey, Chad, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about emissions on THORChain, because when I think about this sometimes, like I know the emissions curve of the reserve of the network is it's similar to Bitcoin in like its slope, right? Where obviously it's emitting a lot at the beginning and then kind of has a short steep drop off and then tapers out over infinitely long period of time. So. Well, obviously that's just like one end of things where that's just like that's Rune going to liquidity providers and node operators. That's basically the distribution of the Rune asset over like the lifespan of this network, and obviously like bootstrapping it at the beginning and tapering off more in favor of just organic fees that are generated through swaps, which are now even like overtaking the liquidity emissions already. But like when you look at how just new THORChain is, like we're not even 3 years old. Like it's still in the like if you convert that to like, hey, this is if you're just like looking at Bitcoin, you say like this is still the days of like 50 BTC block emissions for THORChain, because we're just so young and emissions really taper off a lot over time. And I think that's something that like we don't really talk about often, or like the emissions schedule and just organic fees and stuff like that. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, my personal feeling is that I think we had the emission schedule correct when we first launched the network, and there was a community vote a while back to increase it, and it was increased. And I wasn't a huge fan of it at the time. I understand why people wanted it, because they wanted to get more yield, blah, blah, blah. At the time, it made sense in the short term, but I'm not sure it made sense in the long term. And so if I had a wave a magic wand, I'd actually would like to see us revert the emission curve back to where it was initially, and to slow it down from where it was. But at the same time, like our emission curve is like relatively small to the rest of the industry. Like if you look at us versus like Osmosis, for example, right? The amount of tokens they emit per month, whatever, is a lot higher than ours in terms of the percentage of the supply. But yeah, I'm okay with the way it is now. I prefer to decrease this to opt for a more longer term view and help for the protocol, especially in the context like the swap fees have been really great for the last couple of months, like even during the bear market, which is kind of crazy. And the amount of revenue we're generating from swap fees is actually pretty good, even after stream swaps was kind of introduced and people can trade a lot cheaper. So, and I expect it to change over the next like couple of years to be even be better, have more volume hopefully, and that kind of stuff. Like I said before, rugging Coinbase volume and all that kind of stuff. So I'd like to see us reduce it. I don't know if it'll actually happen or not. It's not really a topic that I was like gonna burn political capital on, in a matter of speaking. At least not at this stage, especially when there's so many other things going on.
Hey guys, it's 1:20 in Berlin AM, so I think I'm going to have to bounce, but thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on, Simon. Appreciate it. Yeah, you're welcome anytime to come over here. So thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks, man. See you guys next time. Be well.
Thanks, Simon. I'm probably going to head off myself in about 10 minutes.
All right. Yeah. So if there's anyone else that wants to come up and say anything, or like any like final points people want to make, then let's just final round right here. And then we'll call it quits.
One thing that I don't think came up, unless I tuned out for a second, but the test that the Treasury did about doing faster streaming swaps, I don't think we've touched on that on the space, but that seems like underreported how big that's going to be, because I mean we're talking about streaming swaps being like significantly faster, right? Do we want to go into that a little?
Yeah, sure. So initially, it was the recommendation of the team that a stream swap would happen every 10 blocks, which is basically once a minute, right? And that minute gives the arbitrage bots time to counter trade the trade you just did, so that your next trade, has a better price execution. That's basically what it means in a high level. And so the treasury just took a bunch of funds. I think it was like $100,000, and just traded a bunch of times back and forth, testing, 10 blocks and 5 blocks and 4 blocks and 3 blocks, 1 block. And what I found was actually quite surprising is that like, even if you do it on a 1 block basis, from what we've seen, like it actually has the best price execution. You would think it'd be the worst because, you give arbitrage bots very little time, but because synthetics allow them to arbitrage the blocks like really, really fast, you can get away with that, and it works pretty well. I would caveat that, and this is my 2 cents, my personal opinion, is that like this probably works generally, but it may not work like all the time, right? And especially in the cases where there's high amount of volume, arbitrage bots already burnt all the synthetic Bitcoin they have or whatever, and they don't have more to burn, so they have to fall back to layer one arbitrage, which obviously takes more time for Bitcoin, being 10-minute block times. And so I think in general, it's probably pretty safe to use zero, like a 1 block interval. But if you want to be more cautious, you can increase it to 5 or even 10. But it is interesting to see that how effective it actually is. It's actually much more than I would have guessed, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's really, really exciting. If you had like advice to interfaces, what do you think is wise to try? Like, would it be to just go to maybe like 3 for now or something? Like is 3 significantly safer than 1, or is it all like kind of the same?
My mentality is this: is that I would put it I would look at the swap queue and see the trade volume occurring, right? If you look at the trade volume that's occurring, you can get an idea of like how much volume is passing through the chain, more or less, and that would give you really good more insight about like what is better. And if it's showing just normal conditions and there's not much in the swap queue and there's not like a thousand streaming swaps or something like this, then you can probably just keep it small at 1 or 2 or 3, right? And it'll probably just be just fine that way, right? And if it's not, the worst case scenario is your mint out that gets hit. You get a partial fulfillment, and that's not like the worst case scenario in the world. But in the end, like, people can trade a lot faster, and that's actually more beneficial for UIs than they might give credit for, because if you do trade every 10 blocks and you do 10 trades, that's a 10-minute trade, and the context of 10 minutes, like, how much can the price of 2 assets shift in 10 minutes? Well, some amount. How much can it shift in 1 minute? Well, a lot less, right? And so you're probably going to see less partial fulfillments and less like refunds and all this kind of stuff if you bring it down from like 10 blocks or 9 blocks to 1 or 2. That's my feeling, at least.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that we'll probably see arbitrage get better, because if there's, I mean, the real limit is just like, are stints available, yes or no? And normally, like, 99% of the time, stints are available unless we're at some kind of like cap, which is unlikely to be hit at a moment where there is security space on the network. So that's an unlikely scenario in the first place, and it's more likely that arbitragers aren't taking advantage of the opportunity for whatever reason, like they run out of capital, like it's in the wrong spots or whatever. They're just not arbing. But if the opportunity is like continually presented because more and more are doing these 1 block streaming swaps, then I think that's definitely like something that could just improve over time and get better. And as more interfaces start doing that, like, and this is 10 times quicker than the 10 block ones. You're doing it every block versus versus every 10 blocks. That's 10 times quicker. So the execution on these is going to be like really fast, and you'll be able to fit everything, like pretty much every swap size within like 10 minutes, I think. Like it's pretty substantial actually making that change, but it does rely on like arbitragers actually doing it for big swap sizes. Small swap size, it probably doesn't matter because you're probably only doing like a couple swaps anyway.
By the way, and just to drop a little alpha on you guys, I've been chatting with THORChain about the idea of building a swap UI, and it's something we've been actively talking about and planning. And in that swap UI that I'm thinking about building, like it would probably be zero price protection, one block string swaps, whatever number of swaps that it needs to achieve the 5 basis points, and the UI itself would probably only charge like a one bip fee just to garner as much adoption and usability of THORChain to as high of a market in general, and it would probably utilize like memoless transactions as well to make sure that every wallet in the world could utilize this UI and pay 6 bips on their swaps and get any asset they want, or at least we'll start with the major assets to begin with. But like that's the UI that I'm actually planning on or thinking about building real quick, and that would be no price protection, one block, swaps, and like I think that's going to be just fine for 99.99% of trades, to be honest.
And I've been looking at this for AsgardX. I think personally, like for if you're trying to do max, maybe one block interval might be a bit low, because in that second block you're swapping and you don't know whether the arb trade is going to be ahead of you or not. So whether you're going to get that benefit, you may not be getting that benefit, and the arb's always going to be one behind you. So you need to do 5 to get more. If you're trying to do the maximum, actually hit that 5 basis points. Also, I know that THORnode will give you pretty much the same price, regardless of the interval you select. So you can't necessarily know the expected output could be quite different, whether you do one interval or whether you do 10. But THORnode's not going to give you that because it can't calculate the arb benefit or the arb effect on that trade. So I think it's really interesting, and I also agree there's diminishing returns. So after you go from 5, but that range of where do you select, and it's got really depends. Do I want to do just a 20 swap, 20 quantity swap when 100 is available, or what? So that's something we're looking at with AsgardX and thinking: do we range it? Do we set it? Is 1 too low, or is 2 better, or somewhere trying to move between 1 and 5? And I think there's probably more experimentation and getting some good data out to understand where that balance lies, or to enable the user to set it based on their preference rather than just having it as a set default.
But keep in mind that like when you're doing a stream swap, you're making a small trade in a large pool, because each sub swap is relatively a small trade, and it depends on what the pools are, but just in general, that's true, right? And so if an arb bot doesn't arb between every single sub swap, the price effect that you're having on the pool for that sub swap is relatively small, right? And that the next swap you're doing that wasn't arb, yes, you're getting slightly less execution, but the how much is like extremely small, right? And so it might be just worth that kind of risk of like arb doesn't get this one particular sub swap or 2 of them or whatever, but you get much faster trade execution, and you're less likely to have a partial fulfillment and that kind of that UX experience. I don't know. I think it's worthwhile that different UIs. THORshop's going to do one design, AsgardX can another one. I'm going to try another one, and we'll just look at the data, and the data will tell us over time like what actually makes the most sense, what are the pros and cons, and so forth and so on.
Yeah. It's a hard thing because you don't want to lock the user into one set. And if they're expecting 5 basis points, because that's what they've been told, and they don't get it, then it's just like, I don't know. I don't feel there's like, there never feels to be a right answer. There's just probably a lot of experimentation. At the moment, it's got a slider between 1 and 10 block interval, and it doesn't change like quantity at all, which, I don't think that's right either, but that's, at least you're giving the user some choice to dictate time, even though they're not dictating quantity. It's going to be interesting to see where it all settles.
Yeah, last question, Kingfisher, what's up? Kingfisher, are you there? So, man, you want to say something?
I don't hear Kingfisher if he is talking.
Nope. All right. Well, unless he starts saying something, then we can probably wrap this up. So, hey. Can you hear me now? Is he just like a minute behind or something?
I don't know. He started talking and then just went on.
Yeah, I feel like he's like really behind. I'm not sure what's going on.
Twitter Spaces has bugged us again.
Yeah, sorry. I don't think this is gonna work. All right, let's wrap it up then. Thanks for hopping on, guys. I probably won't be able to do next week, but let's do it again. And when we got more stuff to ship, let's do it. Hope BSC probably soon, and let's see what else goes on. All right.
Cool, guys.
Cool.
Thanks. Later.
See ya.